Hey everybody, good morning again. Just finished putting the Camaro away. I'm gonna go out, walk around the Cutlass real quick before I start tearing that 4L80 apart in the garage. It's not super hot yet, so Cutlass is out here in the street, so might as well do the walk around on it now while I've got some room before I pull it in the garage. So just starting in the interior. So I did insulation and carpet early this year. The seats are a Pro Car seat. They were replaced when I first bought the car. The stock original seats were bad shape. The rear seat was redone about 6 weeks ago or so. Somebody here local in town just refoamed it and recovered it. So here's the back seat, front seats, carpet. I put these Jegs gauges in it. It's got speedometer, tack, oil, water, volts up there, and then it's got the air fuel gauge right here. So I did that because the Jegs gauges were pretty budget oriented. If I were to do it again, I don't believe I would do it. And I've never really had issues with Jegs, and I like them, and I've bought a lot of stuff from them. However, I'm a little disappointed in the gauges. So the speedometer, it's fine up until like 30 or 35. And then it's real jumpy, like it'll go from 40 to 50 to 60 to 65 to 80. Like it doesn't smoothly move like it's supposed to. Now, this has a micro squirt transmission controller for the 4L80. So the transmission controller is the one providing the signal to the speedometer. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe it's something in the transmission or in the micro squirt, and maybe it's not the gauge. So I hooked the laptop up to it, and I pull up the Tuner Studio software and switch it over to the transmission project. And I can watch mile per hour on the laptop, and it's smooth as silk. Like it doesn't have any issues. It goes nice and smooth, like what you would expect a speedometer to do. And so that's kind of disappointing. The problem is I would rather replace it with like the odometer stuff, or even, and I really thought about this, and if this wasn't such an issue as far as trying to keep the car somewhat original and as far as in the interior, like I don't want an aluminum dash or anything like that. I've thought a lot about putting a tablet in there as a dash, and so the Megasquirt products work really well with the Pi dashes. And I don't really care for the fact that it takes so long to load up. Like I think once they get power, it takes 25 or 30 seconds before all the gauges are pulled up. So that was one of the cons to doing it. The cost would have been almost a wash by the time I bought the 5 gauges compared to just buying the Raspberry Pi Dash. But it's too late now. If I replace the speedometer, then I've got to make all the other gauges match. And I really don't want to do that. The other thing is like the oil pressure works really well, but it's a mechanical gauge. I'm not sure how you could have screwed that up. The water temp doesn't. So like up to about 165, it's accurate. But this thing will climb up to where it's at like 205. So that little dash line between 190 and 220. And that's not really necessarily bad for an LS. Like LSs usually run 200, 220 degrees. So that didn't really concern me, but I thought, well, that's kind of weird. Like it's got a 190 degree thermostat in it. It's got 2 fans. So it really shouldn't be running that hot. And I happened to have the laptop in here one day as I was data logging it on the way back from work, and I noticed that the gauge shows 205 and Tuner Studio showing 188. And so I tend to want to believe the Tuner Studio stuff more than the gauge, especially since I had the issues with the speedometer. So really, it's just gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, well, as long as it's under 220, the car's under probably 200, and a lot, especially now that I'm going to be doing a bunch of work on it. When I start driving it again, I'm going to have the laptop in here with me a lot, doing the data logging and tuning and trying to get this thing dialed in. So I'm just going to have to deal with it, live with it. So my recommendation, probably don't go with the Jegs gauges. I'm not really going to show you the console because I built this myself and it was kind of my first shot at it. It works well for what it is. However, it's ugly. It's got 2 cup holders and 4 ports, 2 ports up here and 2 ports right behind the console here to charge your phones for the kids when I have them in the back. So that's kind of what I wanted. Like, I wanted the cup holders, I wanted the charge plugs. However, after I started putting it together and realizing that I'm way in over my head, it didn't turn out that great. It'll work for now. I think in the future I might build a fiberglass one to where it's kind of all fiberglassed in, and then I do some Bondo and body work on it, and then just spray it black. That might be something that I do in the next year or so. But let's keep walking around. So that's the interior. Nothing really fancy. It was a factory AC car. It has the vents in that side, and that side you can see at some point Mike owned it. I don't know who Mike is, but at some point I'll replace the dash pad, but not right now. I will, because this is Las Vegas, it gets hot and it gets miserable, so I would guess that after I do the brakes and the rear end and the converter and trans or whatnot, the next big fix for this car is going to be putting air conditioning back in it. I will most likely go with a vintage air kit. They don't make one for a 67 Cutlass. They make one for like the 67 Chevelle, or I think they do like a Skylark or the GTO or something. So a handful of the A bodies. Problem is the A bodies are a lot alike, but the interiors are not so much alike. The dashes aren't even close to being the same. So I might see if I can kind of piece one together. I don't know. I got to do something though, because it's a fun car to drive, and it sucks that you can't drive it for 4 or 5 months out of the year while it's too dang hot. So this is a 4.8. I believe it's an LR4. It's a 4.8 truck motor. It's got an LS1 intake on it. It's got the cheap eBay fuel rails, eBay fuel pressure regulator. The turbo here is a 7665 VS Racing turbo. It's a cast wheel. Most people don't really like it. I'll get into that a little bit more in the future. Has an LS3 water pump on it, and I did that so the LS3 water pump is the same offset as the trucks, and I didn't want to change like the balancer and stuff. And so the problem is I tried to leave the truck intake and alternator on it when I put it in here, and that puts like the truck alternator like pretty high up here, and the truck intake's fairly high. And when I got it set where it needed to sit in the car, the intake was going to be through the hood, and I did not want to cut the hood. So I decided just to put the car manifold on it. So that's what it's got. I think that's like a 140 amp alternator. I like big alternators. I don't want to have to worry about not having enough amperage. So just got an eBay blow off valve. You can see the wastegate down there. I believe that's a 60 millimeter. It's an eBay gate also. I think it has like a 9 or 11 pound spring in it. So just oil feed, wraps up and around, goes back over there. 3-bar map sensor. Like all of this stuff here will go away when I do the AC. The vintage air stuff moves out all of that stuff underneath the dash rather than out here on the firewall. So 3-inch downpipe, oxygen sensor. This thing does have full 3-inch exhaust. Like I mentioned, it's got the 2 electric fans. I believe these came off of like a Ford Taurus. No, they're not Taurus. The Taurus are the single fans. I think this was off like a Ford Windstar van. But they're just wired through 2 relays over there on the fender, and they just come on with the key. So intercooler piping. There's an intercooler. Sits right back there. That's got an LS1 car, power steering pump. These 2 lines here are actually for the remote oil filter. The oil filter actually is like right underneath the driver's door. The oil pan that I put on this thing was made for an A body. However, it doesn't have the provisions for the oil pump or the oil filter on the pan, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. I think I probably would have gone with a little more expensive pan and have the filter where the filter belongs, but you live and learn. So the Cutlass we're going to do videos on. I'm going to do the front brakes. I got a disc front brake kit for it. So I'm going to go ahead and go change, and we will come back out. I'll get the garage clean. You guys don't need to see that. And I'll drag that for a lady over here, flip it over, start yanking it apart. For that, I will have the video going. We can see what's in it.
So stick around. Thanks.